These are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's training webinar on Quality Analyser. My name is Jason Green. I'm Head of Workplace Research here at F&TRC. So I'm going to take you through Quality Analyser today, particularly focusing on our Auto Enrolment tool, which has had the newest of the updates applied to it. And just really want to spend the next 40 minutes or so just walking you through an entire process of Quality Analyser, showing you all the features and how the system works so that you're able to get the most out of it when you guys are using it yourselves, and hopefully it'll be able to assist you in any recommendations that you're putting forward. We've got quite a number of people on the webinar today. From what I understand, it's a mixture of people that have been using the system previously quite a lot, and indeed some people that are brand new and have not used it before. So apologise in advance if I go over anything that's quite basic or the functionality that you've already seen. But I'm going to go through the whole process from start to finish, doing a full end-to-end comparison report, just so I can draw out to you all the nuances of the system, explain to you how it works, and hopefully answer any questions. You are all in listen-only mode, which means currently you're all muted. If you have questions as we're going along, there is a questions box that you can type any questions into. As we're going along, I'll try and answer those if I'm going. If not, what we'll do is I'll go through all the questions at the end, and I'll hopefully be able to answer them then. So you can all see my screen, hopefully, which is the welcome page or the login page to Quality Analyser. Now, if you're on this webinar, it means you're already registered, so you already have your own logins and access to be able to use the system. Obviously today we're focusing solely on Workplace, but for those of you that have been in before, or as you can see, we actually do have a number of other tools that are available on the system. So we don't just have tools that are in the corporate space, we also have a vast amount of tools that look at individual protection, and indeed we're adding some into the savings investments areas, and we also have a load of tools that look at software, looking at risk comparison tools and profiling tools, etc. But obviously today's focus is going to be purely around Workplace. And we've got three tools in here at the moment, which is the group pensions SIP tool, which candidly is not as up to date as the other two, and group SIP slightly more specialist, not as common, shall we say. So the two main tools that we've got currently active in the system are the Workplace Pensions tool and the Auto Enrolment tool. Now, I actually want to focus today on the Auto Enrolment tool because this is the one that we've recently had the most upgrades to and has some of the newer content. But before I do that, I just want to briefly draw your attention to the ratings that we have within the Workplace Pensions. Now, some of you will have seen these possibly already, but back in the summer, we conducted some workplace pensions ratings, whereby we went out and benchmarked 9 of the pension providers who completed our research. And as you can see on the screen here now, awarded them all either a gold, silver, or bronze medal, giving them an overall rating for their workplace pensions proposition. Now, you can see on the screen here that they've been given an overall medal for their proposition. And then we've also ranked 8 underlying elements that we've deemed due to consultant advisors and indeed providers of what they believe are the most 8 relevant areas that should be taken into consideration when looking to benchmark a pension proposition. So not only has every organisation been given an overall ranking, as we can see across the top here, we've also given them each individual gold, silver, bronzes for each of the underlying areas that we've benchmarked. We've added this into our system because obviously the comparison tool, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is really a detailed set of bespoke analysis, which you can really do on an employer basis, looking in greater detail. The reason why we've added in the comparison tables here, the benchmarking tables, is more just to give a sort of a high-level overview. So what we're trying to do with Quality Analyser is provide varying levels of information to assist you in the recommendation process. So almost at a high-level glance, as a snapshot, you're able to look at the medal table here and see potentially at an overall perspective which providers may be stronger than others in the marketplace. To support this, we've also done individual fact sheets for each organisation. So if you were to click on the overall medal or the company logo, so if I take Royal London as an example here, we'll see that it then takes me through to a bespoke fact sheet on that organisation, which in the same, they're all laid out in the same fashion. But what they do is they go through each of the underlying areas and give a brief description of some of the key features of the proposition, drawing out on some of the strengths and differences between their competitors. These fact sheets can then be printed and used as part of your recommendation process or kept on file. But again, it's just giving another level of detail here that you can use if you want some high-level analysis without actually maybe possibly going into the detail of producing a comparison report. Now, this is the workplace pensions ratings. We have just conducted the 2015 Auto Enrolment ratings as well. So literally probably within the next day or two, when you click into the Auto Enrolment tool, as like in the pensions tool, there'll be a ratings tab here. This time we've benchmarked 13 auto enrollment suppliers in exactly the same fashion. So there's an overall medals table giving them a gold, silver, bronze. This time within auto enrollment, we've identified 9 underlying areas. And again, there's an individual fact sheet that's been produced for each company. So that will be going live on the system as soon as we put that live. And we have a press release pending going out announcing those awards. Probably, if it's not going to be tomorrow, it will be on Monday. But what we really want to focus on today is actually conducting your own benchmarking and producing your own comparison reports. Now, I said we're going to do this on the auto enrollment tool, as that's had the most recent updates to it. Just to give you a little bit of background, the workplace pensions tool is the bigger out of the two. That consists of approximately 3,400 underlying questions that we've asked in our benchmarking. We do a detailed basically online questionnaire that we have on another system that we then send out to the providers and we ask them to complete it. So the providers put all the data into our system and then that is then used to drive the comparison reports that I'm going to show you today. So the workplace pensions one is the bigger out of the two. This looks at the whole picture. So this is looking at not just the auto enrollment capability they have, but actually, the whole pension proposition, the underlying mechanics of it, what other facilities and functionality they have in addition to the pension. Then it's also looking at a lot of the hygiene factors, so looking at things like extranet opening times, what online services are available, security procedures that are in place, how you can produce valuations, and so on and so forth. So it's really encapsulating everything that you'd expect from a pension. The auto enrollment comparison tool is more isolated. This is solely looking at the AE functionality and process that they have. So it's a bit more isolated. It's not actually looking at the full pension picture. It's just looking at what the providers can offer in terms of auto enrollment support and what their AE proposition is. Now, the auto enrollment tool consists of approximately 1,100 questions, and we've recently just added some additional detail in there to specifically look at what auto enrollment suppliers can do in relation to integration with payroll providers. And we've also added in a number of new questions identifying whether or not each provider has employer fees, setup costs, exit costs, ongoing fees, etc. So that was the new content we've added, and that's been live now for approximately 2 weeks or so. So in order to conduct a comparison report, and they all work in exactly the same way, you choose the tool that you want to look at, and then if you click on the comparison tab here, you'll see we're presented with 4 options. So we're able to produce a report from you, produce a report from a template, recall an existing report, or download a printable fact find. Because this is under individual secure login, this obviously, anything held within the system relates to your own login. So if we go to recall an existing report, you're able to go back and recall any reports that you've previously produced, as they'll be saved under the system. The download printable fact find is basically a paper version of this tool. So if you were going to use this offline and wanted to gather notes when you were speaking with a client, then you could do it via the printable fact find and then come back and then use that to input into the system. A report from you, as the name sort of suggests, is going through the whole process from scratch, from new, making your selections. But the way I'm going to do the demo today is actually as a report from a template, which makes things slightly quicker and easier. So by clicking on here, you'll see that I've been given an option here to select a template. Now, as I said, because this is all under individual logins, anything here will just relate to yourselves. So you can see here I've got a vast number of templates that I've created over the past, but I have one here that I've set up for today. So I'm going to go through using this template, and I'll explain how it works as we go through the process. But you'll notice here there's a download and an upload button. So for anyone who has actually created templates within your own secure login, you're actually able to share these with other people within your organization. So this has been proved particularly useful, whereby we speak to a lot of advisory firms who are having their compliance, or possibly one of the senior planners, create a number of templates that give the house view on what they believe auto enrollment advice should be the starting block of. Create these templates, which may be for different target groups or different client groups, and then those templates can be downloaded and uploaded and shared with anybody else within your firm, meaning that any advisor within your organization has a starting block, has this sort of like the same house view on what they would deem to be the most important things you should be considering. Now, these templates can then be tweaked and changed on a client-by-client basis, depending on the individual employer needs. But what it enables you to do is all have that same starting block or house view. So I've selected the template, and then what we're doing here, the first stage in the process, we're actually being asked to build an employer profile, which is detailing some of the specifics around the actual employer that we're speaking with and understanding a little bit more about the actual scheme dynamics. So what we're being asked to do here, and again, this is under individual logging, so I've got any previous employers set up here as templates, and I've got one that I built today. We're actually asking, I think, 7 or 8 here questions, which are the sort of key acceptance questions that any provider would consider when they were looking to whether or not they'd accept a scheme. So what we're doing here is we're being asked to input some of the employer particulars so we can build up a very high-level profile. So you'd obviously put the company name or the employer name in here. I've called it today's webinar. And then we go through and we answer these questions. So we're asking you, what's the size of the employer and how many members are going to be in the scheme? So in this one, I've said it's 15 to 24 people. We're being asked what the expected monthly contributions are going to be. And again, there's a drop-down box here to choose from. And in this instance, I've said it's going to be between £100 and £249 per member per month. We want to understand whether or not the employer has passed their staging date. And in this case, I've said no. And I've said that they are staging within 3 to 4 months' time. We are asking what the payroll frequency is. So in this instance, let's say it's monthly. And then we're just finding out a little bit about the employer. So is the employer willing to pay a one-off joining fee? So in this scenario, I've said yes, is willing to pay a fee. And then is the employer willing to pay an employer fee? And in this case, I've said no. And then finally, does the employer have more than one payroll in operation? And again, we've said no. So what we're trying to do here is build up a bit of a high-level profile about the individual employer. And by depending on how these questions have been answered, these all relate to questions in the underlying research. Therefore, some providers are willing to accept a scheme based on these terms. Other providers will not be so willing. So what we're able to do now is actually narrow our search down depending on how the providers answered the underlying questions in the research. We now see that actually some providers are removed from the search because they've simply said, based upon the terms we've put in here, they're not willing to accept the scheme. But hopefully that's going to come clear on the sort of next stage as we go through. So having built this very high-level client profile, we then actually start the benchmarking process, whereby we start deciding what do we actually want to go and benchmark and what do we want to include in our report. Now you'll see that I've got a number of these areas have already been predefined and ticked for me because I'm working from a template. If you were not working from a template and this was a report from you, it's here where you'd go through and you tick up to 10 areas that you want to include. Now, if we hover over any of these with our mouse, we see here it brings up a brief description of what we mean by communications and what the communications section consists of. So we can see here this comprises of 2 underlying areas, which will review the provider's capabilities in relation to worksite communications and member communications. If we were to look at the default investments and governance section, for example, we can see that this is actually then broken down into looking at default investments, governance, investment fund options and underlying auto enrolment governance, pensions regulators subdivided here into looking at the TPR and then the record keeping functionality. So by hovering over any of these or indeed clicking on the blue information icon, it brings up that information for you. So what you're being basically asked to do here, you're being invited to select up to 10 areas that you think are most relevant to your client and what we want to include in our benchmarking. So having done that, we're then invited to go through and weight those on how important we think they are. So again, because I'm working from a template, my weightings here have been predefined for me. If we were doing this from new, you'd go through and you'd allocate a percentage to each of the areas you've chosen, obviously with the idea of getting to a grand total of 100, based on sort of weighting them on how important you think each element would be to your individual clients. Each of these then has a notes button next to them. So if you wanted to do so, you could add any supporting notes, commentary, reason or rationale as to why you've chosen a particular area and as to why you've weighted it. So bearing in mind, this will all form part of the output report at the end. So you get a word report at the end of this process, and any notes that you put in will form part of that. So it does hopefully become a really truly sort of bespoke client report for you. Having gone through and weighted the areas as you see fit, we're then invited to go through and choose the providers that we'd like to include in our search. Now, in the case of the auto enrolment tool here, you can see we've got traditional life and pension providers and indeed master trusts, and we've also got included in here Johnson Fleming and True Potential also as well. Now, the criteria on this is that you must select a minimum of 3 providers per search that you do, but in this instance I'm just going to do a select all in this case. So we can see here that I've actually chosen to include all providers that we hold data on, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we've chosen to include all at this stage. We then go through, we just do a very brief playback where the system plays back to me as the user the high-level areas that I've chosen and weighted, and then it's confirming back to me I'd like to interrogate the data of all 12 providers. And then based upon that high-level data, so all we've done so far is select these high-level areas and weight them, the system's able to produce the first of the reports for us, which is the initial report. So if I click on that button there, what this initial report is playing back to me is, again, the areas I've chosen as the advisor or the user and how I've weighted them, so the areas I want to benchmark. The small bar chart on the right-hand side here is just playing back to me how each of these areas that I've chosen have scored relative to the underlying benchmark for each provider. And then the main graph at the bottom here is telling me, based upon what I've chosen here as the user and how I've weighted it, it's gone away, interrogated the underlying research and questions for each of these areas, and come back and told me that in a descending order, which provider might be most suitable or most aligned to my needs based upon the responses that they've put into our system. Now, you'll see here that this graph doesn't have 12 providers in it. It in fact only has 7. And as we scroll down slightly further, we've got a little table here giving us reasons why 5 providers have been excluded. So as I was trying to highlight before, based upon the detail that we put into the employer profile at the start of the process, it's actually now told us that even though we ticked to include all providers in our comparison report, these 5 providers have been removed, and for the following reasons. So Intelligent Money have been removed from the search because we said we did not want to pay an employer fee, and they apply an employer fee of between $250 and $750, depending on the size of the scheme. Friends Life have been removed because, again, they apply an annual employer fee of £950, plus they will not accept a scheme of less than 45 lives, and we said our scheme was between 15 and 24 lives. And again, Aviva, Standard Life and Johnson Fleming have all been removed for the same reason, because they all apply an employer fee as well. So what the system done here is it's eliminated these providers from our benchmarking now because they've been told us they're not suitable based upon the employer profile that we've set in the system. there's no point including them now because each of these providers have told us they're not willing to accept a scheme based upon these terms. So we've now narrowed our search down to 9 providers, and based upon what we've told us so far, it's telling us that rural London potentially might be the most suitable, going down in descending order. So that's the first stage of the analysis, but we're then invited to go through and start building up the second layer of detail. So here, very similar to what we did on the initial stage, we're being asked now to weight the underlying areas in each section. So I highlighted before that the default investment and governance section, for example, consisted of 4 underlying areas, looking at AE governance, default investments, governance, and investment and fund options. And as like we did on the initial process, we're invited to then go through and weight each of these elements based on how important we think they are to our clients. And then we go through each of the areas that we've chosen and allocate these weightings. Now again, because I'm working from a template, this is pre-selected for me or predefined for me. If I was doing this as a report from you, I'd have to go through and select these each time. It's here that then we can go through again and add any additional notes. So we've, like for example, we already added a note at the high level for charges. Then if I wanted to go and add an underlying note at one of the subsections as well, we're able to do so by adding in more notes here, building up more detail and more information about our clients. So having gone through this, obviously, in some consideration, you're then able to go through to continue to view your selection. And as like before, what this does here is it plays back to us the high-level areas that we've chosen, how we've weighted them. It then goes through and it tells me how we've then subdivided all our underlying weightings. Each of these has a refine button in them. So if upon reflection, we felt that implementation and training shouldn't be a 50-50 split, we actually feel like the implementation process is more important than the training process, we could, for argument's sake, go through and change this to 80%, 20%, submit that, and the system will then automatically update for us and bring that through. Sorry, excuse me. We then go through and just have one last playback. Now it's telling us that we've actually decided to, we ticked to include all providers in our research. However, we already know from what came through on the initial report, 5 of those providers are actually unsuitable now and they've been removed. We then have a couple of options here to give your report an additional name and indeed a description. So at the client profile stage, at the very start of the process, we added our employer's company name. So that will be on our report. So it's a bespoke report for your employer. But you can then also add an additional name and a description to that. So particularly if you were doing possibly a larger scheme or something in the secondary AE market, we found that a lot of advisors were going in, if you might speak to the HR director, the HR director might come up with a set of priorities that you may weight and do this process and produce a report. However, if you had the same conversation with the finance director, the likeliness is he or she will come up with a different set of priorities and weightings. So you might want to do various iterations of the report within one firm, and then allow yourself to build up sort of a high-level overview and more of an holistic view of what their employer needs are before you make any recommendations. One, I think, important thing to point out here is the do you wish to save your selection as a template button. So I've kept on referencing as I've gone through this process that we were working from a template that I'd already created. If you had gone through this process from scratch and you had ticked the areas you wanted to include in your benchmarking and allocated your percentage weightings as you've gone, it's here you could then tick to save that and give it a name. And then by doing so, that's then saved, as I said at the start, under your individual login for you to recall, as I've done today, which means you can go through the process much, much quicker. And then also you can then download and upload that template and share it with any colleagues. So we're now at the stage where we get to produce the detailed report. So if I click on the generate detailed report at the bottom there, the system's now going to go away, take into account that second layer of detail we've been putting in, and bring through for me the final analysis. And very similar to the initial report, it plays back to me in the pie chart here on the left-hand side, the areas and priorities I've chosen and weighted as the user. It then plays back again as before, how each of these areas selected score relative to the underlying benchmark set by ourselves. and it then gives us a realigned graph of best fit or overall match based upon the needs that we've selected here. Now, it doesn't have the full table here at the bottom telling us that providers have been removed because that was on the previous page, but it just replays back to us here that we have actually excluded 5 providers in this instance. But what it does, not only does it give us here the overall graph of which provider might be most suitable overall, it then goes through and looks at each of the priorities that we've chosen and gives us the same set of graphical analysis. Now, just because one provider comes top overall, which in this instance happens to be Royal London, it obviously doesn't necessarily mean that Royal London are going to be best at everything. So we can see in this case, for example, it's actually got true potential coming out top for the charges section. We see here, time and date stamped is actually brought through the notes that we've added as we've gone through. And as you go through this, you can add additional manual notes at this end as well. But what we're doing here is giving you an extra set of details. So just because, in this it says Royal London came out top overall, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be best at every underlying aspect. So they were top in pre-auto enrolment, again, true potential coming out top for the joiners leavers process, Aegon coming out top for default investments and governance. So I think, we're making a recommendation. It's almost about compromise as well, because no provider is going to be best at everything. So hopefully what you're able to do here is demonstrate to the client, provider X might be most suitable overall. However, they're not as strong as other providers in certain areas, and hopefully this report will then allow you to demonstrate that. So that's the on-screen version, which gives you the full set of analysis for each of the up to 10 areas that you've decided to include in your benchmarking. But what we really recommend is you go through to the printed versions of these, and there are 2 options for that. So there's a summary report and a detailed report. Now the summary report, if I just click on that, that should instantly download for me. There it is. And what the summary report does is just produces a very high level 2-page document for us, which if I open that up, simply explains what Quality Analyser is, details for us the areas that we've chosen to benchmark, a brief description of what they are, and the percentage weightings that we applied to them. And on the back of that page, it just has that overall graph of best fit or potentially most suitable provider, just telling us here that some people have been excluded. This is obviously a very high-level analysis. Some providers are potentially doing this report based upon what they know about the employer in advance of going to see them, so they can take something along initially to demonstrate they've been thinking about their needs. Other advisors, are giving these back to the employers to keep on their own records. But this is just really the summary high-level element. What we recommend is you go through and do the actual printed detailed report in Word, because I think that's where you actually get the most value. If I click on that button, it's got a pop-up box here telling me, would I like to include a data table showing the responses from the top 5 suppliers of the benchmarking? So basically what this is telling me is it's going to go away and produce the detailed report now, which will have all the graphical information that we've shown on screen. And then for each of the individual areas that we chose to benchmark, it will also bring through the underlying question sets for those. So i.e. the underlying questions that we've asked the providers to complete. And by default, that will bring through the top 5 scoring organizations. And then it will give you an option to choose a 6th from the remaining list. So let's choose Nest in this instance. And if I press submit, that will now start generating that report for me. Now these reports actually take about approximately 2 minutes to download. So if I cancel that and do a Blue Peter style, here's one I prepared earlier. If I bring this over, what you will get is the final output report, which will look like this. So it will detail to us, obviously, Quality Analyser, the report that we've run. Here it will tell us who it's been prepared for. Now obviously I called my client today's webinar date. Here it would have the employer name of the client you're speaking with. Then it tells us who it's been prepared by and the date. It goes through and it gives us just an index page telling us the areas that we're going to be looking at. Then as like we saw on screen, it gives us that overall graph of potentially most suitable provider, along with the table of exclusions if any providers have been removed. It then goes through and looks at each of the individual priorities that we've just decided to benchmark. So we have the same set of analysis on the charges section, we have the same set of analysis on the pre-auto enrolment, so on and so forth. And then once we get to the end of the graphical information, it then brings through the underlying data tables. So for each of the areas that we chose to benchmark, it brings through the underlying question set detailing all the questions that we've asked. And as I said before, by default, the top 5 scoring organisations, and we had that option there to add in a sick provider of our choice. So what this is hopefully allowing you to do is sort of really get under the bonnet of the propositions, and you're able to draw out where the differences are, who's doing what, and so on and so forth. And you have that same set of analysis for each of the up to 10 areas that you chose to include. So hopefully this is now really providing you with a load of detailed information about each provider, which will then help you not only support obviously how we got to the graphical information in the report, but also allows you then hopefully to get under the bonnet fully and make a really informed recommendation on which provider might be most suitable for your clients. And in that report, obviously, it's a Word document there that can be printed, or indeed you can cut and paste out of this and use it as part of your own suitability letter process, or really do as you wish with it, really. But what I want to just go back briefly now and do is just show you the difference about how that client profile, depending on what we choose there, can really alter the output of the reports. So if I go back to the auto enrolment tool, and if I go back to the comparison, let's close that page and do it from a fresh one, sorry, so it's a bit clearer. Just wait for my system to catch up with me. And this time, if I go to the comparison again, I'm going to do a report from template, and I'm going to select exactly the same template as I've just been working from, the webinar from today. And this time, I'm going to choose the same client as we used before, but I'm going to change the boundaries on it slightly. So just to show you how this can differ, if I was to, for argument's sake, say in here, okay, actually it's a scheme of 60 plus members. However, the contributions are 100 to 249. This time, let's say we're staging and the employer has a weekly payroll. Let's say this time they are less than 90 days from their staging day. The employer is willing to pay a fee. Actually, let's change these over around. Let's say they're not willing to pay a joining fee, but they are willing to pay an employer fee. Do they have one with a payroll? No. So I've just jumbled up here the employer profile. Obviously, every time you do this, this is going to differ. Same template. So I'm just going to click through this very quickly. But what we want to do here is get to that initial output report stage, and this time, hopefully demonstrate that depending on how we set that employer profile, we can have different people removed each time. So here we can now see, for argument's sake, we really changed this around, and now we've had legal and general removed from the process because legal and general will not support weekly payroll, which is what we've chosen, and they will not accept a scheme which is staging in less than 4 months from their staging date. We said it was 90 days. Johnson Fleming this time have been removed because they have a setup fee of £1,075. People's Pension have been removed because they've introduced a new setup fee of £500 back on the 23rd of November. And this time also, Aegon have been removed and Royal London have been removed, again, because both of them will not accept the scheme less than 4 months from their staging date. So this time our analysis is giving us a whole different set of data because obviously Aviva and Standard Life were previously removed. So now it's obviously giving us a whole new set of data on which provider might be most suitable, but it's all dependent on that employer makeup. So depending on what the scheme particulars are and whether or not the employer is willing to pay fees, this is going to change every time. Even though you keep your benchmarking criteria the same, the outputs are going to differ. Now, just to make you aware, all the data that's in the system is as kept up to date as physically possible. Now, we do not have direct links to the providers. It's the provider's responsibility to manually put the data in. However, we work very closely with each provider to ensure that as and when their propositions change, we're aware of it, and that data is reflected in our systems as soon as possible. So actually, the point about the People's Pension here is a really good example. Their press release went live on Monday morning, the 23rd of November, confirming they'd now introduced an employer fee. By Tuesday morning, we had our system fully updated and fully reflective of that so that we're able to identify that in our benchmarking immediately. So hopefully we're able to offer you as real-time information as possible so that you can sort of be confident that any recommendations you're making are based upon the most up-to-date information that we can get our hands on. And, we do work very closely with each provider in that respect to ensure that's kept up to date as possible. So I think that's pretty much covered everything that we needed to go through today. Now, we've gone through it relatively quickly. There's been a couple of questions come through, so I'm just going to answer those as we go. So we've had one question here is, are these the only companies in the comparison, or are they a best of the lot? And another one about are you whole, and we've had a similar question about saying are you whole of market. So obviously this is not whole of market because it does not have every provider in it. The way our system works is we actually invite any provider to put their data into the system. Obviously we cannot force them to do so. We charge no fees and there's no shelf cost. So any provider can be represented in Quality Analyser free of charge. However, it just requires a time commitment from them to obviously answer all the underlying questions. Are we whole of market? In the true sense, no, we're not. However, we do actually, as you can see from the names that we've shown up here, we do have the three main master trust providers being Nest, Now and Peoples, and we have the main life and pension providers. The most obvious names I think that get called here that are missing are Scottish Widows, Zurich and Fidelity. We do in fact have data for those providers, however they don't want it currently shared in the open domain and the current market. It's only actually being used for select larger corporate IFAs and EBCs as that's their main distribution route, and are not so interested obviously in picking up the smaller schemes. So are we whole of market in the true sense? No. I mean, I think on the last count there's actually now 106 master trust providers in the market, plus your traditional life and pension providers, plus your middleware and software providers. So if we're looking at a case of auto enrollment, obviously that's going to be a very large number of providers. We do welcome anybody to input their data, but as I said, it's a time resource for them to do so, but there are no fees included. What we do say to advisors that are using the system, if there is a particular provider that you do a lot of business with and they're not represented in Quality Analyser currently, we're more than happy to have a conversation about, okay, how can we work with you, and maybe you can speak to that provider and say to them, look, I'm now using the QA system as part of my recommendation process. You're on my preferred panel where I'd love you to be included. Maybe then they'd be prepared to put their data in, and then we'd be more than happy to have them on there. But as I said, physically we can't force anybody, unfortunately. There doesn't appear to be any other questions coming through at the moment. What I'll do is I'll give you my contact details. So if anybody wants to pick anything up offline, please feel free to either give me a call or drop me an email. So my number here at the office is 0203 457 9987. That's 0203 457 9987. And my email address is jason.green@ftrc.co.uk. That's jason.green@ftrc.co.uk. If anybody has any other questions or want to go for anything, then please feel free to contact me directly. One more question has come through, I think. Please remind me the three providers that have decided not to have their data published. It was Scottish Widows. Sorry, our question came through saying, could you please remind me of the providers' data that have decided not to be published? Those three providers are Scottish Widows, Zurich and Fidelity. So I think that's it on the questions first. So as I said, if anybody has anything else, just come back to me directly. But other than that, thanks for your time this morning, guys, and I hope that's been of use to you. So thank you very much for listening. Bye.